Ukrainian forces always aim to destroy as much Russian military equipment as possible, but it's crucial to do it at the right moment, namely when it's loaded with ammunition. Then any hit results in the complete destruction of the vehicle. Take a look at this video. A column of 4 APCs and 1 tank is advancing. The first armored personnel carrier hit a mine, and then the second one. Their attack was disrupted. One APC turned to avoid the battlefield, but was destroyed by an FPV drone. Here's another column with over 10 tanks and armored vehicles attacking Ukrainian positions. Here's the most modern Russian tank, carrying 42 rounds. It was hit by an anti-tank missile, leading to an immediate detonation and complete destruction of the tank. As they advance on Ukrainian positions, the Russians are losing almost half of their vehicles to minefields. This tank, equipped with a mine flail, detonates anti-personnel mines. They don't harm it, but shortly afterward, it's blown up by 5 mines simultaneously. Sometimes, the Russians realize that they need to clear the passages before an assault. This time, they attempted to use the UR-77 mine-clearing vehicle, but unsuccessfully. The vehicle itself was detonated by a mine and abandoned by the crew. An FPV drone targeted it, and it caught fire. Keep in mind that there was over 700 kilograms of explosives inside. A few minutes after catching fire, the explosives detonated, and the vehicle exploded, creating a mushroom-like column of smoke. Naturally, nothing remained of the machine. Once, the Russians attempted to use an improvised demining system installed on a truck. Russians were always known for their peculiar technologies. This machine was struck by an FPV drone. The explosives, in the form of a long cord, were scattered on the ground. Then, another drone dropped a grenade there, leading to a fire. But a few minutes later, the explosives detonated. Ukrainian forces started to heavily rely on FPV drones, and their use exceeded all expectations. The value and combat power of these small and inexpensive kamikaze drones were discovered by Ukrainian military from the first days of the war. Ukrainians quickly realized that just one small drone could disrupt entire Russian military operation. Take a look at this footage. The Russians set out on a combat mission using 3 armored vehicles. The lead armored transport takes a hit from an FPV drone and catches fire. This single strike proved enough to disrupt the entire mission. See what happened next. 2 armored transports stopped in fear, watching their comrade ahead burn. While they waited and contemplated their next move, Ukrainian artillery started targeting them. At that point, the Russians, abandoning their armored vehicles, began to flee. Using FPV drones, Ukrainians took down another armored transport, and then another. This Russian combat mission ended without even getting started. It was soon discovered that certain types of FPV drones can carry anti-tank grenades with shaped charge capability, capable of penetrating the armor of any Russian tank. Compare these 2 explosions on Russian tanks. The first tank is destroyed by a javelin missile, while the second is taken out by an FPV drone. The outcome is the same, but the javelin missile cost nearly $100,000, whereas the drone cost less than $1,000. Take a close look at this munition attached to the drone. It's actually an RPG-7 cumulative grenade, a Soviet-made anti-tank weapon. Such an ordnance can inflict significant damage on any Russian tank. It weighs around 2 kilograms and can penetrate armor up to 500 or even 600 millimeters thick. Now watch this video. The kamikaze drone is carrying precisely such a projectile. You can tell by the distinctive cone shape visible in front of the camera. Striking a moving tank with a cumulative munition immediately triggers the detonation of the tank's ammunition, turning the Russian tank into a fiery ball. The timing is also well chosen, as the tank was on a combat mission, fully loaded with ammunition. And recently, they decided to launch an attack to encircle the city of Avdiivka. Looking at the map, encircling the city might seem easy. Russian forces will attack from the north and south to encircle Ukrainian forces. But Avdiivka is the most fortified position in the Ukrainian defense along the entire eastern front. The fiercest Ukrainians are fighting here. If the Russians manage to encircle Avdiivka, they will break the Ukrainian defense and expand their success further. However, breaking the Ukrainian defense is not so easy. From the very first day, Russian tanks and armored vehicles were detonating on minefields, being destroyed by artillery, anti-tank missiles, and FPV drones. The battlefield was littered with wrecked and burnt armored vehicles. Take a look at this video, for example. This is the Stoltsepek flamethrower system, the most fearsome type of Russian multiple rocket launcher systems. But within a few seconds, this weapon will be destroyed thanks to its own ammunition. Stoltsepek fires vacuum-reactive projectiles, which are very dangerous for infantry. That's why Ukrainians are particularly eager to hunt down this weapon. In this case, Ukrainian forces will use an FPV drone as a means of attack, but it's crucial to do so before the MLRS launches its projectiles. Typically, the vehicle is fully loaded and then moves to its firing position to launch the entire package of rocket projectiles. This is the perfect moment to strike with an FPV drone. A kamikaze drone leads to the detonation of the entire projectile package, causing the entire vehicle to explode like fireworks. It's quite a spectacular scene. This explosion occurs precisely because the vehicle was fully loaded with ammunition. It's like hitting an ammunition depot. FPV drones destroy a significant portion of tanks and armored vehicles. If a tank has been hit by a cumulative projectile, it will be almost 100% destroyed. It may continue to burn for a while, but sooner or later it will explode, as you can see in this video. Such tanks are not subject to recovery. This tank got too close to Ukrainian positions and was immediately destroyed a T-90 tank. This armored personnel carrier also received a hit from an FPV drone, leading to the detonation of the ammunition inside. Here, an FPV drone destroyed an armored personnel carrier in which all the ammunition also exploded. Additionally, an FPV drone destroyed another dangerous weapon, the heavy flamethrower system Stoltsepek. Another part of the armored vehicles is destroyed using anti-tank missiles. 2 Russian APCs were detected by aerial reconnaissance. When they approached the required distance, they were hit by a javelin missile. One of the armored personnel carriers completely burned down as its ammunition exploded. Here's another case. With the help of javelin missiles, Ukrainian defenders destroyed a T-90 tank. The tank itself is not visible in the video, but the characteristic explosion is clearly visible. The tank's turret was blown off as usual, but upon falling, it also triggered an additional explosion. Please give a thumbs up to the operator of this drone for the amazing work. An interesting fact is that the RPG-7 anti-tank launcher can only engage targets within a range of up to 700 meters, and only if the target is within line of sight. This weapon is intended for close combat. In contrast, an FPV drone can take the same cumulative grenade and employ it within a radius of up to 10 kilometers. This type of cumulative munition is used not only against tanks, but also against various self-propelled howitzers. Take a close look at this video. An FPV drone targets a self-propelled howitzer 2S-19. The cumulative grenade penetrates the thin armor of the howitzer and triggers the detonation of all ammunition inside. The result is a fireball. There are many such cases in the war. A drone armed with such a cumulative munition can also easily destroy Russian flamethrower multiple rocket launchers, RSZO Solntsepek, which is a rather rare weapon in the Russian army. The advantages of FPV drones are clear. They are very cost-effective. To launch a kamikaze drone, you don't need any launching systems. It turns out that in close combat, directly on the front lines, FPV drones are even more valuable than artillery. Kamikaze drones can effectively target armored vehicles while they are in motion, something that artillery cannot do. An average FPV drone can carry a payload weighing from 1 to 2 kilograms over a distance of up to 10 kilometers, which is sufficient for their use across the entire depth of the battlefield. The value of drones also lies in their ability to prevent the battle itself by destroying Russian armored vehicles on the approach, so that Ukrainian infantry doesn't even have to engage in combat. Take a look at one of the scenes of the Russian attack. The first Russian tank in the column gets hit by a javelin missile and explodes. Then, 2 Russian armored vehicles continue moving forward together but get blown up by a mine. Notice that there's already a lot of destroyed Russian armor around them, and they simply become the next casualties. Following them is another tank and several more armored vehicles, all systematically destroyed by Ukrainian artillery or blown up by mines. In their desperation, the Russians wanted to use the flamethrower system Solntsepek. But Ukrainian aerial reconnaissance detected it in time and destroyed it with an FPV drone. All the ammunition exploded, creating a large fireball tens of meters high. And then, another BMP loaded with ammunition was turned into a fireball. In just a few days, over 60 units of Russian armor were destroyed, and 4 fighter jets were shot down. But the Russians didn't give up and continued their operation. In this video, we see 2 Russian tanks moving on a combat mission. The Ukrainians hit the last tank with an anti-tank missile, causing it to explode immediately due to its ammunition load. The second tank decided not to continue the mission and returned by a different route, but a Ukrainian missile struck it there as well. It was also blown up. This combat mission was never destined to be completed. Probably their mission is impossible. This tank was advancing straight towards a Ukrainian bunker. It fired a shot and was hit by a Ukrainian anti-tank grenade, instantly detonating on a mine. All of this happened in just about 1 second. As a result, the crew abandoned the tank without accomplishing the mission. Here's another similar case. The Solntsepek MLRS was detected and hit with a HIMARS missile before it could launch its rockets. You can see the result for yourself. In reality, Russian weaponry was self-destructed due to its own ammunition. By the way, the Ukrainian army now has similar flamethrower systems in its arsenal. They were captured from the Russians as trophies and are now used on the front lines. Using FPV drones, You can also destroy self-propelled howitzers filled with ammunition before they are expended, following the same principle. Take a look at this concealed Russian self-propelled mortar called Nona. It was loaded with its own projectiles from the start. Nona was hit by a kamikaze drone and immediately caught fire, and just a minute later, it exploded and shattered into pieces. Here's the most interesting example. Ukrainian intelligence spotted 2 Russian UR-77 mine-clearing vehicles among the trees. Their coordinates were relayed to the HIMARS team, which targeted the objective with just 1 missile. The HIMARS missile deviated slightly from the target, likely due to the interference of Russian electronic warfare systems. However, this was still sufficient to set the targets ablaze, followed by a spectacular explosion. Take a look at the result. The explosion was of such magnitude that nothing remained of the vehicles, except for charred dark spots. All of this happened because the equipment was loaded with a full complement of ammunition. I'll remind you that a demining vehicle of this type contains a large amount of explosives, which it uses during its operation. Last summer, a similar piece of equipment was abandoned by the Russians during their unsuccessful counteroffensive. The vehicle was fully loaded with ammunition, which amounts to 750 kilograms of explosives. Ukrainian soldiers destroyed it, and look at the result. There's absolutely nothing left of that vehicle. It's definitely beyond repair. The left bank of the Dnieper River, Ukrainian forces have captured and are holding a fairly large bridgehead, including an entire settlement and its surroundings. According to Russian military correspondents, Ukrainians have already started deploying heavy armored vehicles there and preparing an offensive operation to expand the bridgehead. They predominantly use Bradley infantry fighting vehicles. Practice has shown that Bradleys are the most resilient against Russian Lances drones, as seen in this video. The Lance drone hit the Bradley, but it remained unharmed. To counter the Ukrainian plan, Russians are actively using rocket artillery, firing at anything that moves, but it is not proving effective. The main offensive forces of the Russians are currently engaged on the Eastern Front. Therefore, Ukrainians have achieved partial success. On the right back of the Dnieper, Ukrainian forces are supported by the HIMARS multiple rocket launcher. Thanks to accurate reconnaissance, HIMARS suppresses the entire Russian artillery, thus giving Ukrainian infantry the opportunity to consolidate on the left bank of the river. Russians are losing dozens of artillery installations along with ammunition. Take a look at an example of such operations. Reconnaissance spotted a column of trucks loaded with ammunition. The HIMARS rocket hits the first and last trucks in the column. Then the rocket strikes the middle of the column. Almost immediately, the ammunition began to detonate and explode. Russian tanks are also waiting here. Ukrainians destroy them even before they approach, both day and night. Therefore, Russians have started using heavy bombs weighing 500 kilograms and more frequently, hoping to break through Ukrainian fortified positions. This is perhaps the most formidable weapon in this direction, but let's hope that Ukrainians will be able to shoot down Russian fighters launching these heavy bombs. It looks very intriguing. While Russian forces advance with their armored vehicles, Ukrainian soldiers sit in well-fortified bunkers and can completely halt the Russians and burn all their armored vehicles with the help of kamikaze drones. Another advantage of kamikaze drones is their surgical precision. Look at this example. Ukrainian advancing forces cannot proceed on this stretch because there is a fortified concrete bunker ahead, where Russian machine gunners are hiding. To neutralize the machine gun nest, classic military science would use aviation. A fighter jet armed with a heavy 500-kilogram bomb would have to approach the target within a range of up to 30 kilometers and drop the bomb. In modern conditions, this would mean that the Ukrainian plane is likely to be shot down by the Russian air defense system. We would lose a $15 million aircraft and its crew without reaching the target. However, this task can easily be accomplished by an FPV drone carrying 2 kilograms of explosives. Unexpectedly for the enemy, and quite accurately, it flies right into the bunker, eliminating the enemy along with the machine gun. The cost of such an operation does not exceed $1,000 and takes only 15 minutes. It's also relatively easy to manipulate the drone to drop explosives directly into the hatch of an abandoned tank, or fly inside an abandoned armored transport, detonating it from the inside. We've also seen enough such cases. Do you remember the legendary Russian tank support vehicle called the Terminator? Russian military officials claimed that this vehicle was impervious to destruction by any means. Well, it was successfully destroyed using ordinary FPV drones. In this case, no cumulative munitions were even used, unfortunately. One of the tanks attempted to flee the battlefield, but was intercepted by an FPV drone and incinerated. During an advance, tanks require fuel. Therefore, the fuel tanker is a legitimate target for Ukrainian forces. They hit it with a cluster munition, destroying the fuel tanker and preventing it from delivering fuel to Russian tanks. Reconnaissance noticed a Russian BM-21 Grad MLRS during firing. It was decided not to destroy it immediately, but to track it. As a result, we discovered where they stored their ammunition. Another BM-21 Grad vehicle arrived to load itself with ammunition. While they were loading, their coordinates were relayed to the HIMARS crew, who delivered a precise rocket strike. The ammunition began detonating, resulting in an explosion that demolished the entire location, including 2 BM-21 Grad launchers. Take a look. A Russian soldier captured on camera a Ukrainian tank projectile flying right over his head. This UR-77 was also abandoned by the Russians. Look, Ukrainians threw a grenade at it, but nothing happened because the grenade landed on the upper hull of the vehicle. However, the second grenade hit the armored vehicle's hatch directly, leading to the detonation of all the explosives. Allow me to draw the conclusion that nothing would have happened to this machine if it had been without ammunition. This is clearly illustrated by the following example. If a grenade lands in an empty armored transporter, nothing will happen to it because it's empty. It's just like an empty can. But this armored transporter is full of ammunition that it delivers to Russian soldiers at the front lines. A Ukrainian kamikaze drone hit it, and look what happened. A fireball. And now, let's look at examples involving tanks. We've seen many cases where Russian tanks were attacked by FPV drones, but nothing happened to them. At most, there's some smoke. But even if the tank's interior lining burns, it can still be repaired, or its parts can be used for other tanks, and the Russians do just that. But if you hit a tank when it's fully loaded with ammunition, there's likely to be nothing left of the tank. Russian tanks can be destroyed in various ways, with the favorite among Ukrainians being the Javelin anti-tank missile. Typically, when a Javelin missile hits a tank with ammunition, it causes the tank's turret to fly into the air, and the tank turns into a fireball. Here's the most modern Russian tank, carrying 42 rounds. It was hit by an anti-tank missile, leading to an immediate detonation and complete destruction of the tank. This is a Russian T-72 tank. In the video, you can see a high-precision German projectile, Smart 155, hitting the tank. According to Ukrainian military sources, this tank was hit from a distance of 19 kilometers. To confirm that this indeed is the Smart 155 projectile, compare the video of the projectile test and the video of the Russian tank being hit. This munition leaves a distinctive smoke trail above the target. The Smart projectile can be launched from almost any 155mm howitzer, and its shooting accuracy is achieved through special sensors and control systems, allowing them to identify and attack targets with high precision. In this video, We see another tank being destroyed by a Smart 155 projectile. Here's another hit on a tank with the same high-precision projectile. And yet another hit. Here, the characteristic smoke trail left by the Smart projectile is also visible. Ukrainian forces often use Smart projectiles to destroy Russian armored vehicles. This munition can penetrate tank armor with a shaped charge jet, leading to guaranteed destruction. Look, aerial reconnaissance detected coordinated efforts of the Russian anti-aircraft system, Buk, and radar station. The first Smart projectile hit the radar station. The second projectile targeted the launch platform. The exploding ammunition provided a spectacular display. The Russians still have no knowledge of what high-precision artillery is. To hit a target, they use outdated Soviet multiple launch rocket systems that consume thousands of munitions daily. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians can target objectives with just 1 or 2 rounds. The Russians attempted to evacuate it, but were unsuccessful. When you launch an artillery shell at a target, it can lead anywhere. You're very lucky if it hits the tank directly. However, by using a kamikaze drone, you can take your time to aim and select a specific spot where you want to strike, thus causing devastating damage to the tank. FPV drones can even make enemy vehicles dance. And this is no joke. Such an incident occurred a few months ago. Reconnaissance spotted a Russian truck with an anti-aircraft machine gun attached to it among the trees. The kamikaze drone accurately hit the vehicle and set it on fire. The vehicle started to reverse, then stopped and just began dancing. This continued until it was completely engulfed in flames. You won't believe it, but Ukrainian soldiers are currently training to use FPV drones to shoot down Russian helicopters. In this video, you can see how a Ka-52 helicopter narrowly avoided colliding with the Ukrainian drone. We don't have successful cases yet, but I think we'll soon have videos like these. Helicopters typically fly at extremely low altitudes, fearing anti-aircraft defenses so they could become easy prey for FPV drones. Ukrainian forces have also advanced in the use of other types of remote-controlled drones. Drones are now actively used for road mining with anti-tank mines. Additionally, successful tests have been conducted on drones capable of delivering munitions right under advancing Russian tanks. They appear as small remote-controlled carts. They can carry up to 10 kilograms of explosives and can disable any type of Russian military equipment. The tank crew is unlikely to be able to disarm such a kamikaze drone. In addition to all of this, FPV drones are very effective for disrupting enemy logistics. They destroy vehicles that deliver ammunition, fuel, medical supplies, and food. Surveillance equipment, antennas, and the like are also targeted, causing chaos in the Russian command and slowing down their advance. Furthermore, FPV drones targeted the trucks supplying Russian forces with ammunition. All of them were ruthlessly incinerated. Watch how a self-propelled howitzer M109 precisely destroyed a Russian truck. Among other things, Ukrainians generously sprinkle the battlefield with cluster munitions. This leaves the Russians with no chance of escaping the battlefield. Ukrainian soldiers also discovered a pile of anti-tank mines and directed a kamikaze drone there, destroying all the mines. Additionally, an ammunition depot in an abandoned house was destroyed. This offensive operation has become the most unsuccessful in the past year of combat actions. To better oversee the defense, General Zaluzny, the overall commander of the Ukrainian armed forces, arrived on the front lines. It's very important for the general to see everything with his own eyes. Only then can strategic decisions be made correctly. The war in Ukraine is no longer what it started as. It's no longer a war for territories. It's a war of attrition. The primary goal is to destroy the enemy's military potential, a goal Ukraine is successfully achieving. But most of all, Ukrainians have destroyed Russian armored personnel carriers, exacerbating global warming. Russian armored personnel carriers are easily set on fire and destroyed. Ukrainians refer to them as canned goods stuffed with ammunition. Sometimes, a tank doesn't explode if it has very little ammunition left. In such cases, there's another method involving a combination of two types of drones. The first FPV drone damages the tank, causing the crew to hastily abandon it. The second drone drops a grenade inside the tank, leading to a fire erupting within the tank, and after some time, it also results in the detonation of the remaining ammunition and the complete destruction of the tank. However, sometimes an FPV drone strike can immediately lead to the detonation of the ammunition and the tank's explosion, as we can see in this video. Or in this video, we see how a kamikaze drone triggers a detonation on its first attempt, causing the explosion of an ammunition-laden armored transporter. Obviously, the more ammunition there is in a vehicle, the faster it can lead to an explosion. Of course, many Russian tanks finish themselves by running over mines. This is a common practice among the Russians. But what I love the most is when the American HIMARS MLRS destroys Russian multiple rocket launch systems. American weaponry boasts incredible precision thanks to GPS coordination, so the Ukrainian army successfully employs it in the battle against all types of Russian artillery and usually emerges victorious. Russians have never won a counter-battery battle against HIMARS. Russian MLRS systems take a long time to reload, making them easy to detect and target. The Grad BM is the most mass-produced Russian MLRS. It is designed for use on the front line and has a relatively short firing range of only 15 to 20 kilometers. This means that these vehicles have to get very close to the front line to launch their projectiles. As a result, these machines are most vulnerable to HIMARS rockets.
Pressure on the areas of southern Zaporizhia region will likely continue through the upcoming weeks. Kyiv's forces will likely continue attempts to advance in the direction of Tokmak from the Robotyne-Verbov salient in the Zaporizhia region. While a breakthrough in the direction of Tokmak remains possible in the coming weeks, direct Ukrainian artillery fire on Russian supply routes and force concentrations in the Tokmak area are more likely in the immediate term. Fighting has intensified at multiple points along the 500-kilometer, 930-mile front line. Battles are also raging along the southern front in Zaporizhia, where Ukrainian forces are making minimal gains and coming up against formidable Russian fortifications. The Russians have also been pressuring the Kupiansk and Lyman fronts while focusing their efforts on the Zaporizhia and Kherson fronts to prevent further advance of Ukrainian forces. Hanna Maliar, Ukraine's Deputy Minister of Defense, recently claimed that Kiev's forces had destroyed 6 Russian ammunition depots in the space of 24 hours, a remark that hinted at Ukrainian tactics. Over the past day, Ukrainian troops repelled all enemy attacks near Orakovo, Vasilivka, Kryorivka, and Ivanivsky. Russians tried to regain their lost positions near Kurdyumivka but had no success. Russians launched airstrikes near the Donetsk region's Pivnikna. Over 10 settlements were affected by Russian artillery strikes. According to the General Staff, Ukraine is conducting offensive operations both north and south of the city of Bakhmut. Russia is deploying its reserves but suffering heavy losses. The General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces spokesperson, Andriy Kovalov, said Russian forces were pushed out from their positions near the village of Orakovo-Vasilivka, lying northwest of Bakhmut. Ukrainian troops have achieved partial success in their advance and solidified new positions. The conflict in Ukraine has sparked discussions about the future of modern warfare and the relevance of main battle tanks. While tanks are unlikely to be completely phased out, their combat utility has come under scrutiny due to the effectiveness of anti-armor weapons and tactics demonstrated in this war. The situation has underscored the importance of employing tanks strategically and using them in combination with other assets for optimal results on the battlefield. In the ongoing war, Ukrainian forces continue to deal significant blows to Russian tanks, with the current counteroffensive potentially hastening the destruction of Russian armored vehicles. The reasons for this one-sided outcome are manifold. The Ukrainian forces' determination and tactical expertise have played a vital role, along with their possession of advanced anti-tank weaponry, rockets, artillery, and armored vehicles. This combination of factors has proven highly effective in countering the Russian tanks. Throughout the course of the conflict, Ukraine has shown that with timely and consistent help, it can prevail on the battlefield even when its troops are outnumbered. Just as American and British handheld Javelin and N-Law missile systems helped Ukraine halt the advance of Russian tanks around Kiev in the early stages of the invasion, American high-mobility artillery rocket systems known as HIMARS have since changed the face of the conflict and helped Ukraine liberate a significant amount of territory previously occupied by the Russians. Such aid, when promptly and consistently supplied, dramatically improves the odds of a decisive Ukrainian victory over Russia. Colonel General Oleksandr Syrsky, commander of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, said, in an interview with the BBC, Ukrainian service Bakhmut is of strategic importance, primarily because it is the center of concentration of the main directions and roads. The roads from Debaltsev, Seversk, Horlivka, Kostiantynivka, and Sloviansk pass through the city. Using a well-developed road network, Russian troops can attack in at least 3 such operational directions. The scorched earth tactics the enemy used earlier are now turning against them. Our troops have had tactical progress. However, the enemy's engagement of such large forces here indicates that this is still a strategic point for them. All conditions have been created to retake Bakhmut, but it must be done with significantly fewer losses than the Russians suffered to capture the city. The Defense Intelligence of Ukraine estimates that today Russia has approximately 400,000 troops in Ukraine. About a quarter of them, up to 100,000, are concentrated in the Lyman-Kupiansk front. Another 40,000 are near Avdiivka, where they are actively trying to surround the city. The Ukrainian military showed a video of the launch of a salvo of 3 US ATA-CMS missiles on Missile Troops and Artillery Day on November 4th, rare footage of the new weapon in action in the country. The Ukrainian armed forces attacked occupied Crimea with these missiles for the first time. Specific capabilities in this package include Javelin and AT-4 anti-armor systems, more than 3 million rounds of small arms ammunition and grenades, 12 trucks to transport heavy equipment, maintenance, and additional munitions for national advanced surface-to-air missile systems. A Ukrainian counteroffensive against Russian forces has been particularly fruitful in the past few days, and Ukraine's troops are fulfilling their main tasks, a senior security official said on Tuesday. Recent information emerging from the front lines also seems to indicate intense fighting spread Sunday beyond the Bakhmut area in northeastern Donetsk Oblast, where the two sides have been bogged down in a bloody slog over small chunks of territory for nearly a year. There appears to be a fierce battle centered in southern Donetsk Oblast, and other skirmishes a short distance away in Zaporizhzhia Oblast, further to the west. "This is not a show," Zaluzhny said in the recent interview with The Post, which was published on Friday. "It's not a show the whole world is watching and betting on or anything. Every day, Every meter is given by blood. In the north, Ukrainian forces made tactically significant gains, according to the Institute for the Study of War, as they pushed the Russian forces back toward the village of Yahidne. Ukraine's Special Operations Forces showcased their precision by eliminating 3 Russian tanks with drone strikes on the Donetsk front. Aside from the tanks, other enemy military equipment was also destroyed. Kamikaze drones have once again demonstrated their effectiveness in a battle with Russian military equipment. FPV drones were able to destroy several tanks worth millions of dollars. The Russian military has lost another one of its TOS-1A thermobaric rocket launchers to a Ukrainian improvised kamikaze drone. It is said to have occurred recently near the town of Avdiivka. FPV drones have destroyed millions of dollars worth of Russian military hardware. Just one T-90 tank costs at least $2.5 million. For comparison, the average cost of one kamikaze drone without ammunition is about $500. Ukraine is strapping rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs, to cheap racing drones and using them to attack the Russian front lines. It's an effective method of gathering intel, destroying expensive equipment, and controlling the battlefield that represents a fundamental shift in how wars are fought. Ukrainian forces had broken through Russian defensive lines in several places on the Bakhmut front. Ukraine said it has taken back the eastern village of Klishchivka in what would be Ukraine's second significant gain in this week, marking the latest success in a more than 3 months-long counteroffensive on the Bakhmut front. During the past day, Russia launched a missile attack on Ukraine using air-launched cruise missiles. A total of 43 cruise missiles were detected. As a result of the Ukrainian Air Force and the Air Defense Forces of the Armed Forces efforts, 31 enemy cruise missiles were destroyed. Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said Russian forces were still trying to regain lost positions in the region despite losing out on the territorial fight over the control of the village. The Ukrainian General Staff said as a result of attempts to recapture at least some of the lost positions near Bakhmut in the last 2 days, Russia has lost 15 tanks and 12 armored vehicles. Klishchivka and Avdiivka is our path to a breakthrough on the right flank of Bakhmut and the key to the success of the entire further offensive, said the 3rd Assault Brigade, which took part in the push. During the past day, the Ukrainian Air Force inflicted 10 strikes on clusters of personnel and Russian military equipment. Units from rocket forces and artillery and UAVs hit 1 command post, 3 anti-aircraft missile systems, 5 artillery pieces and 1 ammunition storage point near Bakhmut. Ukrainian forces have broken through Russia's defensive line for the first time in the nation's counteroffensive, successfully liberating the village of Robotyne in southern Ukraine. Now, several Russian military bloggers are painting a gloomy picture of the frontline situation for Moscow's forces in parts of the south. One of the best known of these, War Gonzo, said the Ukrainians had gained a foothold in Robotyne and are attacking Novoprokopivka, which is under heavy shelling. The Ukrainian advance in the Robotyne area in the western Zaporizhzhia region brings Ukrainian forces closer to launching operations against second lines of defense that may be relatively weaker than the first Russian defensive line in the area. The Ukrainian General Staff said Friday there had been further success in 2 areas, towards the village of Novoprokopivka and further east in the direction of another small settlement. The General Staff said their troops are consolidating their positions, inflicting artillery fire on the identified enemy targets, and conducting counter-battery operations. If the attack is staged on this flank, Ukrainian forces could attempt to reach the city of Melitopol on the Azov Sea to sever the territories under Russian control in two and city-off supply lines between Donbass and Crimea. Over the past day, in the Kupiansk direction, the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine reported 30 combat engagements took place across multiple battlefronts. The Armed Forces of Ukraine struck 4 Russian command posts, weapons, equipment cluster, and 3 artillery units in firing positions. The video shows an assaulting column of Russian tanks led by mine-clearing vehicles and followed by at least 15 armored personnel carriers. The first Russian losses come when a tank attempting to drive through a wood line hit anti-tank landmines.
Давай!
Avdiivka is a stronghold of Ukraine that has been solidly built over the past 8 years. This strategic fortress is located north of the city of Donetsk, which has seen fierce fighting in recent weeks. The Institute for the Study of War said the Russian forces are amassing personnel and equipment for a third massive assault on Avdiivka after 2 failed attacks in the last month, adding that the Russians are likely to focus their offensive on the ACCP in the northern part of Avdiivka. Russian forces will continue intensifying assaults on Avdiivka, Donetsk Oblast, hoping to seize the town by the end of 2023. New video released by Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade shows a Russian attack column being hit and damaged by artillery strikes during a failed attack in the Avdiivka sector in Ukraine's eastern Donbass region. The assault forces are facing a lethal combination of Ukrainian weapons, including first-person view drones, anti-tank missiles, artillery, and mortars able to wreck tanks. At this stage of active hostilities, Ukraine's defense forces are fulfilling the #1 task: the maximum destruction of manpower, equipment, fuel depots, military vehicles, command posts, artillery, and air defense forces of the Russian army. Russia's attack on the region appears to be an attempt by Russia to seek a symbolic victory. Ukraine's General Staff reported that Ukrainian forces had been holding back the Russian offensive near Avdiivka and repelled Russian advances near the settlements of Sieverne, 6 kilometers west of Avdiivka, Tonenka, 8 kilometers west of Avdiivka, and Pervomaiske, 11 kilometers southwest of Avdiivka. They have also attacked on several fronts but failed to reach their goals, with a total of 50 clashes taking place on the front over the past day. Valery Zaluzhny, Commander-in-Chief of Ukraine's armed forces, believes that the war with Russia is moving to a new stage: positional warfare with static and attritional fighting. To win, Ukraine needs advanced technologies. Despite heavy losses, Russia still had superiority in weapons, equipment, missiles, and ammunition, Valery Zaluzhny warned, calling on Ukraine's allies to deliver warplanes and drones, as well as modern electronic warfare and mine-breaching technology, among other things. Five days after the Russian attack kicked off on Tuesday, the fields between Russian and Ukrainian positions north and south of Avdiivka are littered with wrecked Russian vehicles. The defending Ukrainian forces are inflicting fairly significant losses on the Russians and disrupting their logistics near Avdiivka, which is likely to be slowing the pace of the Russian advance. Unblinking Ukrainian surveillance was key to the defensive effort. Unit 129, which flies drones on behalf of territorial troops in Avdiivka, reported flying for 20 hours straight and pinpointing the entire Russian assault force. Everyone was found, the unit claimed. Avdiivka is located about 56 miles south of Bakhmut and just north of Russian-occupied Donetsk. The town is seen as an important point in Ukraine's defensive lines and considered the gateway to Donetsk. Most analysts believe Russia likely still lacks the manpower to make significant gains in an offensive, including around Avdiivka. But the push indicated Russia hopes to further blunt Ukraine's counteroffensive with its own counterpunch, coming as the weather starts to worsen. Though activity around Avdiivka is an important specific flashpoint currently, it is also reflective of what looks to be a broader surge in fighting in Ukraine as winter approaches. Ukrainian military analysts said this week the liberation of settlements near Bakhmut would allow the military to advance from the southern flank in the Bakhmut area, gaining control of the heights. Klishchivka, about 7 miles south of the city, holds a commanding position that could allow Ukrainian artillery to more accurately shell Russian forces entering or exiting Bakhmut. The recapture of Avdiivka and Klishchivka comes weeks after an important tactical victory for Ukrainian forces in the southern Zaporizhia region, where they punctured through Russia's first line of defense and recaptured the village of Robotyne. The gains in the south are considered more strategically significant, since they bring Ukraine's troops closer to the shores of the Sea of Azov, where they could try to cut the land corridor to the Crimean Peninsula, which Russia seized from Ukraine in 2014. In the video, at least 5 Soviet BMP armored vehicles, 2 trucks, and a camouflaged field ammunition depot by the Russians at the edge of a forest were destroyed. The video also showed Ukrainian drone operators capturing some of the BMP armored vehicles parked by the Russian crews next to each other, which, according to military experts, was a tactical error, regardless of the conflict zone. Ukraine's summer offensive has inflicted substantial damage and losses upon Russian forces. Ukraine's military shared dramatic footage of its fighters targeting a Russian tank convoy close to the Donetsk city of Bakhmut, as it continues with its counteroffensive against Russian troops who are positioned across the south and east of the country. The Russian assault deployed 2 armored columns, each led by 3 heavy T-90 tanks and trailed by 10 lighter infantry fighting vehicles, and aimed at high ground overlooking Klishchivka and the neighboring village Avdiivka, but was burned by Ukrainian artillery. Russian troops conducted unsuccessful offensive actions in the areas of the settlements of Novoprokopivka in Zaporizhia Oblast. They suffered significant losses among their military personnel, weapons and equipment. They have been successful, are consolidating their positions, inflicting artillery fire on the identified enemy targets, and conducting counter-battery operations, the military's general staff said. Combat has ramped up towards the northern outskirts of Novoprokopivka, south of Robotyne, and close to a line of Russian fortifications in Zaporizhia, according to the 46th Brigade, which is fighting in the area. The Ukrainian military claimed its forces were pushing towards the village of Novoprokopivka, south of Robotyne, a village in Zaporizhia that Kiev secured last week, and Verbov, another settlement 10 kilometers to the east of Robotyne, according to the general staff. The capture of the small village is seen as an important step in the counter-offensive aimed at cutting the land bridge between Russia and Crimea, and thus suffocating Moscow's forces in the occupied areas to the south. Despite the reported success in Kyiv's counter-offensive, Ukraine and its Western allies are still waiting for a major breakthrough in the campaign, though experts believe this could become easier after Ukraine broke through Russia's initial line of defense on the southern front. Deputy Defense Minister Hanna Maliar said Ukrainian forces can operate more freely in areas with sparser Russian minefields. Ukrainian analysts said the drive to capture a succession of villages was paying off, but much would depend on pushing on for the next 2 months before wintry weather takes hold. A recent Ukrainian video shows what appears to be a full battalion of fresh German armor is ready to engage the Russians, indicating the Ukrainian still has the ability to throw a major punch. Recent Ukrainian gains around the Zaporizhia settlement of Verbov have raised hopes that the long-awaited breakthrough may soon materialize. Meanwhile, Ukrainian infantry and armored units are still thought to be pushing into the bulge, developing in Russian defensive lines 11 miles southeast of Orikhiv, where recent battlefield reports indicate significant Russian losses and the possibility of a sustained Ukrainian breakthrough. On Thursday, the Ukrainian Air Force also inflicted 13 strikes on clusters of Russian personnel, weapons, and military equipment, 1 strike on an anti-aircraft missile system, and 2 on Russian electronic warfare stations. In addition, Ukrainian defenders destroyed 2 tactical reconnaissance UAVs. Ukraine's counterattacking forces hoping to exploit gaps wrought in Russian defensive lines to achieve a significant breakthrough towards the strategic target of Tokmak, prompting Moscow to deploy reinforcements to accomplish the main goal of the summer campaign, which would be a southward breakthrough in the direction of Tokmak. The Ukrainian command must commit itself to a powerful assault in this area, which would require bringing additional reserves from other directions. In the months since Ukraine launched its counteroffensive, artillery has only become more important as Kyiv makes creeping advances in the eastern Donetsk region and along the front lines in Zaporizhia. The GPS-guided rockets of the HIMARS system, able to hit targets at long range with pinpoint accuracy, have been credited with turning the tide of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, the HIMARS missiles that Ukraine currently uses have a range of 80 kilometers and cannot reach many Russian-occupied areas. Russia can also be expected to bring extra reserves to the area, but so far, it hasn't been able to stop the Ukrainian offensive aimed towards Tokmak. The Russian armed forces' passive strategy here amounts to moving from one defense line to the next, sometimes engaging in counterattacks, sometimes retreating under pressure from fresh Ukrainian units, and using reserves to patch up the defense and rotati the exhausted troops. Kyiv has said, as Russia steps up its attacks on Ukrainian defenses in eastern Ukraine. Battlefield accounts and video images geolocated to multiple sectors around Avdiivka confirmed repeated attempts by Russian forces to break through Ukrainian lines by advancing in massed formations of 20 to 40 armored vehicles led by tanks. Repeatedly, advancing Russian forces were halted and turned back by concentrated Ukrainian artillery strikes. The Russian military and fighting around Avdiivka likely suffered its worst combat losses since mid-February, and by some measures suffered one of Moscow's worst battlefield defeats of the war thus far. Moscow's troops intensified their attacks at Avdiivka last week in an effort to encircle the town. Kyiv reported that Russian forces have suffered heavy casualties in both manpower and equipment during these attacks. They do not stop their attempts to encircle the city of Avdiivka after last week's failed strike, Ukrainian General Staff said. They regrouped and launched new assaults there. New combat footage shared by Ukraine's military on Saturday captures what it says is the destruction of Russian tanks and armor. Valery Zaluzhny, commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, said, "The enemy is actively deploying assault units, throwing in a large number of armored vehicles, and using aircraft and artillery. Despite this, Our soldiers continue to heroically repel the attacks, inflicting losses in enemy manpower and equipment.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Tuesday said that Russia is already losing soldiers and equipment near Avdiivka faster and on a larger scale than, for example, near Bakhmut. Russia appears to be suffering severe losses as it wages its new offensive in eastern Ukraine amid some of the bloodiest fighting in months, according to Ukrainian officials and independent analysts. Russia lost 6,030 soldiers in Ukraine during the past week, according to a Monday update from the General Staff of Ukraine's Armed Forces. The news comes as Kyiv's forces reportedly conducted multiple strikes on Russian positions over the weekend. Newsweek has not been able to verify Ukraine's figures independently, and other estimates tend to be more conservative than Kyiv's. The Kremlin does not frequently comment on its estimates of troop casualties, and when it does, experts have said its numbers are not accurate. Newsweek reached out to the Russian Defense Ministry via email for comment. Some of the videos show columns of Russian armor coming under withering Ukrainian fire as they try to advance, battered by artillery and anti-tank missiles, and running into minefields. In other videos, Russian forces can be seen being barraged by U.S.-supplied cluster munitions. Large groups of Russian infantry can be seen being struck by artillery. In its most recent assessment of the war, ISTU said that along with strikes on Russian-occupied Kherson Oblast on Saturday and Sunday, Ukraine attempted an unsuccessful drone strike at an oil refinery railway in Convoy, Crimea, on Sunday. Ukrainian officials have said they believe the determined Russian effort to seize Avdiivka is motivated by the Kremlin's desire to claim a significant victory ahead of Russia's presidential elections next year. It appears that Russian forces are continuing to use ineffective and costly tactics in offensive efforts near Avdiivka, leading to high personnel and vehicle losses, and that they have continuously done so in several waves of attacks over the past week, suggests that the Russian military command is prioritizing this axis, despite continued and growing losses, the IS-2 wrote in an earlier assessment on Saturday. Last month, a video showed at least 14 Russian armored vehicles forced to drive in single file to pass through minefields behind a mine-clearing tank, attempting to make their way through high explosive and cluster munition strikes. The majority of the force is BTRs, Soviet/post-Soviet military armored personnel carriers. Half are shown to be knocked out or disabled and smoking at the end of the attack, and Ukrainian positions seem intact. A close-up in the 2-minute edited video shows at least 5 Russian foot soldiers jumping off a BTR near Ukrainian positions. A Ukrainian anti-tank rocket fired at close range hits the BTR in seconds. Heavy fighting continues near Avdiivka in Donetsk Oblast, where Russian President Vladimir Putin's military has dedicated rich resources. However, Kyiv reported Putin's forces have sustained heavy losses in their efforts to capture Avdiivka. Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade said in a Monday Telegram post that Russia has seen nearly 7,000 soldiers killed or wounded in Avdiivka during the past 3 weeks of fighting. The center also said Russia had lost 100 tanks and 250 other armored vehicles in the city during the same period. Logistics are very difficult. 22 kilometers to the city are constantly under fire, both during the day and at night. It greatly complicates both evacuation and bringing in humanitarian aid. Any logistics is all through one road. Of course, the enemy is trying to cut it, Varabash said in a live interview with RFE/RL. The latest footage from the fighting for the Ukrainian town of Avdiivka shows what is now becoming something of a regular occurrence, the destruction of a Russian armored column under withering artillery fire. The video shows several Russian vehicles driving through fields in an undisclosed location near the embattled town in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. Other tanks in the attack, seeing the fate of their comrades, slow down only to come under the same fire. One is hit and destroyed, while another suffers less damage, and at least some crew try to escape. The drone footage then cuts to a wider shot, showing pre-burning wrecks while another tank makes a hasty reverse retreat. The scenes have become regular as Russia continues its hugely costly attempt to take Avdiivka. Russia has sustained record levels of losses in its attempt to take Avdiivka, with other footage of the fighting showing chaotic scenes and even Russian vehicles running over their soldiers. Russia has once again stepped up attacks on Avdiivka and is almost certainly attempting a pincer movement to encircle the town, reports on Thursday said. It said Russian forces are likely near the town's colossal coke plant in a key tactical position, close to the main road leading to Avdiivka. Meanwhile, footage shows a graveyard of Russian armored vehicles in Avdiivka, where Russia has mounted its most significant attack in months. A new video shows the battered remains of Russian vehicles in an area where Russia has launched its most significant attack against Ukraine in recent months. The video, filmed by Ukraine's 47th Separate Mechanized Brigade, also contains footage filmed from a drone as it approaches and then hits a Russian armored vehicle, as well as massive fires and billowing smoke coming from the remains of some tanks. The video is part of a wealth of footage that has emerged from the heavy fighting around Avdiivka, a strategic town in eastern Ukraine that acts as a gateway to Russian-occupied Ukraine. The Institute for the Study of War on Thursday noted recent Ukrainian advances in 4 key areas of the front line. The salient formed in the Robotyne area in the southern Zaporizhzhia region, the nearby village of Verbov, the Vremivka region of Donetsk in the east, and on the Russian-occupied east bank of the Dnieper River, known as the Dnipro River in Ukrainian. Officials said Russian forces had suffered heavy losses around the city. It also said Ukrainian troops had repelled Russian attacks in other areas of the 1,000 kilometers, 600-mile front line. Ukraine claimed that its forces destroyed nearly 50 Russian tanks in one day as Russia tried to capture Avdiivka. A video shared by Ukraine's military on Friday appeared to show Russian tanks and armor being destroyed as they headed toward the eastern Ukrainian city. Russia made marginal gains in its renewed push near Avdiivka on Friday, which suggests it is committed to the operation despite high personnel and equipment losses, the Institute for the Study of War, a Washington-based think tank, said on Friday. Kirby noted that it was unsurprising Russia had begun offensive actions, considering their ultimate goal is to take more Ukrainian territory. However, the reasons for its focus on Avdiivka are still being determined, as the ISW previously noted that capturing the city will not open new routes of advance to the rest of Donetsk. Since Russia began its push into Avdiivka on October 10, its forces have suffered high losses of tanks and armor, but continued to launch assaults on the city, according to the ISW. It suggests either that Russian forces believe they can take the city or might indicate that Russian military command is poorly prioritizing offensive operations regardless of their cost, the think tank said. And with Ukraine engaged in a counteroffensive, making only incremental gains in the east and south, its commander-in-chief spoke to the new U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff,